The morning my brother's heart stopped on my operating table, I had already been awake for 19 hours. That detail matters. Not because it makes what happened more dramatic, but because it's honest. And if there's one thing my family never gave me credit for, it was my honesty. I was 32 years old, chief of surgery at Mercy General Hospital in Portland, Oregon, and I hadn't spoken to my mother in 4 years. My brother, I hadn't spoken to in 6. My father stopped speaking to me the day I turned down his offer to manage the family hardware store and told him I was going to medical school instead, he said, standing in the kitchen in that flannel shirt he always wore. Coffee cup in one hand, the other gripping the counter like I'd just told him I was joining a cult. You think you're better than us. That's always been your problem, hasn't it? I was 18. I didn't think I was better than anyone. I just knew that I needed to leave. My mother cried. She always cried when she wanted me to feel guilty, and for a long time it worked. She said I was abandoning the family, that I was selfish, that my brother, 3 years older, the one who'd stayed, the one who'd taken the hardware store job and bought a house 2 streets over from them and married a woman my mother had personally selected. My brother was the one who actually loved them, who actually showed up, who was actually good. I left anyway. I put myself through undergrad on scholarships and loans. I waited tables on weekends and tutored pre-med students on Tuesday nights for $15 an hour. I got into Johns Hopkins School of Medicine on my second application, cried in my car in the parking lot of the restaurant where I worked when the email came, and called my mother to tell her. She said, "That's nice. Your brother just got promoted. He's going to be running the whole store now." I stopped calling after that, not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I stopped because every conversation cost me something. I couldn't afford to lose the certainty that I was doing the right thing, that my choices were valid, that I was allowed to build a life that didn't fit inside the 4 walls of the house I grew up in. Every phone call sent me back to being 18, standing in that kitchen, watching my father's face close like a door. So I stopped opening the door. I did residency in Boston, fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery in Houston. I moved to Portland 6 years ago for the position at Mercy General, and I have not looked back since. My apartment is small and quiet, and it smells like good coffee and the books I keep buying and not finishing. I have colleagues I trust and 2 friends I would do anything for, and a patient survival rate in the top 3% nationally for my specialty. I go for a run every morning along the river when my schedule allows. I eat dinner alone most nights and I don't mind it. My family, as far as I knew, was still in Millvale, Pennsylvania, still in the same house, still running the same store, still telling each other the same story that I was the one who left, the one who thought she was too good, the one who failed the family. I had made my peace with that story a long time ago. What I had not made peace with, what I never could quite fully close the door on, was the memory of my mother's voice the last time we spoke. I had called to tell her I'd been appointed chief of surgery. I'd worked for it for 5 years. It meant something. It meant everything. She said, "Your sister-in-law is pregnant. We're going to have a grandchild. Isn't that wonderful?" She hadn't acknowledged a single word I'd said. I said, "That's wonderful, Mom." And I meant it, because I'm not a monster. And then I hung up, and I didn't call again. I want you to understand what it feels like to disappear inside your own family. Not to leave them, I chose to leave, but to disappear. To have your existence acknowledged only when it's inconvenient to someone else's narrative. To be referenced only in contrast. My brother stayed, therefore he is good. I left, therefore I failed. The logic is circular and airtight, and once you're inside it, there's no point trying to argue your way out. You just live with the shape of it pressing against you. Or you move to Portland and become a surgeon and let 19-hour shifts fill the space where the argument used to be. That Tuesday started at 5:45 in the morning. I had a valve repair scheduled at 7, a consultation at noon, and a meeting with the department heads at 3 that I was already dreading. I'd been in the building since before dawn, drinking bad hospital coffee and reviewing charts in my office, when my attending, a second-year resident named Doctor, Keen, who had tremendous hands and terrible instincts about when to stop talking, knocked on my door to tell me the 7 o'clock was delayed because the anesthesiologist was stuck in traffic. "Get me updated labs on the 312 patient," I told him, "and find me a better coffee." He found me the coffee. It wasn't better. By noon, I'd done the valve repair, which went cleanly, answered 47 emails, eaten half a granola bar, and discovered that the 3 o'clock meeting had been moved to 4:30 because the chief of medicine had a conflict. I was standing at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor, reviewing a post-op report when my pager went off. Trauma alert. Bay 4. Blunt chest trauma. Suspected cardiac contusion. BP dropping. Requested cardiothoracic consult immediately. I handed the chart back to the nurse and walked. I don't run in hallways. It's something one of my attendings told me in residency, and it stuck. If you run, the patients see you running, and they don't know you're running toward them. They think something is catastrophically wrong, and panic makes everything harder. Walk fast. Walk like you own the building. Walk like whatever is about to happen, you can handle it. I walked like that down 2 corridors and a flight of stairs and pushed through the trauma bay doors. There were 3 nurses and a trauma attending already working. The paramedics had gone. On the table was a man, and it took me a full 3 seconds, which in that context is a very long time to recognize that the man on the table was my brother. He was 35 years old and he looked 60. That was my first thought, which I immediately filed away because it was not useful. He was gray-faced and there was blood on the left side of his chest, and his eyes were closed, and the monitor above him was showing me exactly how unhappy his heart was about the situation. The trauma attending, Dr. Reyes, looked up at me with that expression I know well, the one that says, "I'm glad you're here, this is bad. Please be better than the situation." 40-mile-an-hour collision, she said. Driver's side impact. Suspected hemop pneumothorax. Possible myocardial contusion. Pressure's been dropping since intake. We've got 2 large bore IVs. Chest tube on the left is draining, but not resolving. Echo shows fluid around the pericardium. I was already at the table with my gloves on. I looked at the echo image on the screen. I looked at his face. I looked at my brother's face. "What's the name?" I asked. I asked it like I didn't know, because I needed someone to say it out loud so I could decide what to do with it. "Daniel Marrow," one of the nurses said. My last name before I took my mother's maiden name for medical school because I wanted something that was mine and not the hardware store's. I looked at the monitor. I looked at the pericardial effusion on the echo. I looked at his blood pressure, which was 74/40 and still dropping. "Get me OR3, I said. "Tell them we're coming in 5 minutes. There is a rule about treating family members. It exists for good reason. The idea is that emotional involvement compromises clinical judgment, that proximity to a patient creates hesitation or overreach or tunnel vision. It's a real phenomenon. I've seen it happen. I have told residents to step back from cases because they were too close. But here is the other thing that is also true. I was the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the building. I was the only one available, and my brother's pericardium was filling with blood. You make the calculation you have to make. You set the rest of it down in a corner of your mind where it will wait. It is very good at waiting. I have learned, and you do the thing you trained for 19 years to do. I'm performing the surgery, I told Dr. Reyes, not as a question. She nodded once. She understood. She has good instincts. I was already moving. What I did not know, because no one told me and there was no reason anyone would have, was that my family was already in the building. My mother, my father, my brother's wife, whose name I had never learned because by the time he married her I was already gone. Apparently, they had driven 6 hours from Millvale to Portland because my brother had been visiting a friend here, a college friend, someone none of them had mentioned to me in the years we spoke, because they had not mentioned anything to me in the years we spoke. His car had been hit by a pickup truck running a red light on Morrison Bridge. He'd been conscious in the ambulance long enough to give them a contact number. They were in the surgical waiting room on the second floor. They had been there for 40 minutes before anyone came to speak to them. The person who came was Dr. Keene, because I had not yet had the presence of mind to send someone else, because I was in the middle of opening my brother's chest. Dr. Keene is 27 years old and earnest in a way that sometimes makes me want to send him home to think about things. He told them, in the way he tells people things all at once, without enough breathing room, that their family member had suffered significant chest trauma, that there was bleeding around the heart, and that the chief of surgery was performing an emergency procedure right now. My mother asked, "Which surgeon? What's her name?" Dr. Keene said my name. I know what happened next because Dr. Keene told me later, with the wide eyes of someone who has witnessed something they don't fully understand. He said my mother went very still. He said my father sat down. He said my brother's wife looked at my mother and said, "Isn't that?" And my mother said, very quietly, "Yes." He said the three of them just sat there after that, not speaking. He didn't know why. He asked me, later, if there was something he should have said differently. The surgery took 2 hours and 40 minutes. The hemopericardium was more extensive than the initial echo had suggested, and there was a laceration on the right ventricular wall that needed repair. I have done this procedure many times. I know the anatomy the way I know the layout of the apartment I've lived in for 6 years, in the dark, by instinct, without having to think about where my hands are going. The repair held. His pressure stabilized. By the time I was closing, his vitals were as good as I could have hoped. He was going to live. I stood at the scrub sink afterward and washed my hands for a long time. Longer than necessary. The water was very hot, and I watched it run over my knuckles, and I thought about nothing at all, which is a skill I have worked very hard to develop, and which fails me reliably at the worst moments. I thought about the kitchen, the flannel shirt, the coffee cup, the way my father had said, "You think you're better than us," as if the sentence explained everything, as if it closed every door that needed closing. I dried my hands. I took off my surgical cap. I walked down the hallway toward the waiting room. I want to be honest about what I felt walking down that hallway. There was nothing triumphant about it. I wasn't composing a speech. I wasn't rehearsing the look on my face. I was tired, genuinely. Physically tired, and I was thinking about the valve repair from that morning and whether I needed to adjust the post-op protocol. And I was also, underneath all of that, doing the thing I always do when something I've locked away starts knocking. I was breathing, just breathing. The waiting room at Mercy General is not a dramatic space. It has beige chairs and a television mounted too high on the wall and a water dispenser in the corner that makes a sound like a small animal clearing its throat every few minutes. It smells like the whole hospital antiseptic and recirculated air and, faintly, the coffee that's been sitting in the machine since morning. I pushed open the door. My mother was the first one to see me. She was sitting in the second row of chairs, her purse on her lap, her hands folded over it the way they always were when she was trying to look composed. She had gotten older. I registered that clearly, and without the shock I might have expected, she had simply gotten older, the way everyone does. And somehow, I had not been there to watch it happen gradually, so I was seeing it all at once. Her hair was more gray. Her face had more lines. She looked, for one unguarded moment before her expression reorganized itself, frightened. My father was beside her. He looked up from the floor when she went still. And when he saw me, he did something I had never once seen my father do in my life. He looked small. Not physically, he was still a large man. The same broad shoulders, the same hands that could close around a wrench or a hammer, or apparently a coffee cup with equal authority. But something in the way he was sitting, hunched slightly forward, hat held in both hands, told me that the past 6 hours had taken something out of him that the flannel shirt and the certainty couldn't give back. My brother's wife was standing near the window. She was young, younger than I expected, and she had clearly been crying, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has heard a name spoken in disbelief enough times in the past hour to have developed a complex relationship with it. No one said anything for a moment that was probably 4 seconds, but felt considerably longer. I said, "He's out of surgery. The procedure went well. He's being moved to the cardiac ICU, and he'll be monitored closely for the next 24 hours, but his vitals are stable and the repair held. Barring complications, I expect a full recovery." I said it the way I say it to every family in every waiting room, clearly, directly, without making it smaller than it is, without making it larger either. He is alive. He will most likely stay alive. These are the facts. My brother's wife made a sound, not quite a sob, more like the physical expression of attention releasing, and covered her mouth with her hand. My mother was still looking at me. Her eyes were doing something complicated that I didn't have a name for. My father said, "You," and then stopped, cleared his throat, started again. "You did the surgery." "Yes." They said you're the chief of surgery here." "Yes." He looked at the hat in his hands. He turned it once, slowly, the brim rotating through his fingers. "I didn't know that," he said, quietly, like an admission. "I know," I said, and I did know. I knew because I'd stopped telling them things a long time ago, and they had stopped asking, and somehow both of those facts had seemed unremarkable to all of us until this moment, when they were sitting in a waiting room in my hospital, and my name was on the door, and my hands had just held their son's heart. My mother said my name, not my title, not the doctor, my name, the way she used to say it when I was very small and she hadn't yet decided what I was and wasn't going to be. I looked at her. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. I have stood in rooms where people have said far more and meant far less. I've had families weep and bargain and rage, and sometimes all 3 in the same breath. 2 words said in a waiting room in Portland by a woman who spent 20 years telling me I'd never amount to anything. I nodded. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because I genuinely didn't. There was nothing inside me in that moment that wanted to spill over. What I felt was something quieter and stranger, something that had been sitting in the corner of my chest for a very long time, waiting patiently, and which had just, very gently, unclenched. "He'll need several days in the ICU," I said. "One of my residents will come to update you in the next hour. If you have medical questions, you can ask at the nurses' station on the 2nd floor, and they'll page me directly." I looked at my father one more time. He was still holding the hat. He had the look of a man standing in a room whose dimensions he had misjudged badly, not just today, but for years, and who was only now understanding the scale of the miscalculation. I didn't say anything to him, not because I was punishing him. I want to be honest about this too. I didn't say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said in that moment, in a beige waiting room with the water dispenser making its small animal sound in the corner. Whatever needed to be said between my father and me was going to take longer than a Tuesday evening, and I was not going to perform a reconciliation in front of a stranger who had just stopped crying for the benefit of people who had not earned the performance. I said, "Take care of yourselves," and I walked out. The hallway outside the waiting room was quiet. Late afternoon light came through the window at the end of the corridor, the particular yellow-gray of October in Portland, and the whole building had the low hum of an institution that never fully sleeps, that keeps going regardless of what happens inside any of its rooms. I walked to the elevator and took it to the 5th floor, and went back to my office and sat at my desk for a few minutes without turning on the light. I thought about being 18, about the scholarship letter, printed on paper so formal it had felt like a contract, about driving my second-hand Honda out of Millvale with 2 bags in the back seat and a gas tank I'd calculated to the last mile, about the first time I held a retractor in a real OR, in a real surgery, and felt something click into place inside me that had never quite been settled before. I thought about what it costs to build a life from the outside in, without a floor to stand on, without anyone handing you the materials or telling you where to start. I thought about every overnight shift and every loan payment and every residency evaluation and every surgery where something went wrong and I had to be the one who fixed it. I thought about the fact that my brother was alive tonight. Not because he deserved it more than my career, not because my family had earned it. He was alive because I am good at what I do, and because what I do matters, and because the 18-year-old girl who drove out of Millvale with 2 bags and a full tank had been right. Not about everything, not about every choice, every trade-off, every year of silence, but about the fundamental thing about the door she'd needed to walk through and the person she'd needed to become on the other side of it. She had been right about that. I turned on my desk lamp. I pulled the post-op notes I needed to write. Dr. Keene knocked at 7:15 to give me the ICU update. Stable, good rhythm, the night team was set, and I told him he'd done well today, and he looked so surprised by the compliment that I almost told him to sit down. I didn't. I wrote my notes. I finished my cold coffee. I checked on 2 other patients, signed off on a consult, answered 3 messages that had been waiting since noon. At 8:45, I put on my coat and took the stairs down to the parking garage. My mother called the next morning. I saw her name on the screen and stood for a moment in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, the river visible through the window, a half-made cup of coffee on the counter. I let it ring. Not forever. I'm not made of stone and I have never pretended to be. But I let it ring long enough to make a decision that felt like mine. Then I answered. He's doing well, I said first, because that was the most important thing and I didn't want her to be afraid for the 30 seconds it would take to get to it. I checked in on him this morning. He's awake and his pressure is good. The night was stable. She exhaled. It was a long exhale. 6 hours of driving and a waiting room and whatever she'd lain awake thinking about last night, all in one breath. Okay, she said. Okay, good. There was a pause. I didn't know, she said. About your career. How far you'd I didn't know. I know, Mom. We should have, she stopped. Started again. I should have asked. I looked at the river. A single rower was out early, the shell cutting through still gray water, methodical and steady. There is a kind of beauty in motion that isn't about speed, that's just about the consistency of the stroke, the way it implies a person who has practiced until the difficulty is no longer the point. I've always liked watching rowers for that reason. You can ask now, I said. She didn't say very much after that. Neither did I, but we stayed on the phone for 22 minutes, which was longer than any conversation we'd had in a decade, and at the end of it she said she was going to take my father to get breakfast before they went back to the hospital, and I said that sounded like a good idea, and she said she would pause, she would like to talk again. I said I'd like that too. I don't know what happens next. I want to be honest about that, the same way I've been honest about everything else. I am not naive enough to believe that one phone call, one surgery, one Tuesday in a beige waiting room closes the distance that opened over 20 years of silence. My father has not called. My brother is alive and does not yet know, in the full coherent sense, who operated on him, that conversation is still ahead of me, and I don't know what's on the other side of it. There are no guarantees. Families are not hardware stores where you can inventory the damage and order replacement parts and have everything working again by Friday. Some things break in ways that leave marks even after the repair. And the only honest thing, is to acknowledge the mark. But I got up this morning and made my coffee and went for a run along the river in the gray October light. And when I came back, I stood in the shower for a long time and felt, very specifically, the absence of something that had been sitting in my chest for years without a name. Not grief exactly, not anger. Something older than both of those. Some original weight that had been quietly present since I was 18 and standing in a kitchen being told that ambition was the same as arrogance. It wasn't there this morning. I don't know if it'll stay gone. Maybe it comes back on bad days, in bad weather, in the particular register of a voice on the phone when I say something too honest. Maybe some weights are just yours to carry, and the best you can do is learn to carry them without letting them change your gait. But this morning, it wasn't there. I dried my hair. I ate breakfast. I drove to the hospital and took the stairs to the 5th floor and sat at my desk with my notes and my calendar, and the day in front of me like a clean chart. Nothing filled in yet. Everything still possible. Dr. Keene knocked at 7:58 to tell me the patient in room 342 had a complication overnight that needed my eyes. "I'm coming," I said, and I put on my coat, and I walked out into the hallway, and I kept moving.